Chapter 946, A Bestowment or a Curse. The ice-cold potion slid down his throat, bringing Klein numbness, one that reached deep into his soul. He had already stopped dancing. His mind seemed to be lifted as though he was high in the air, looking down at the ruined Revival Square, at Kukawa City, which had been left in shambles by the repeated lightning strikes. At this moment, he felt his emotions rouse up for some baffling reason, as all the pedestrians below seemed to be connected to him by some invisible threads. They could be happy, angry, or sad, making all kinds of actions based on his directions. Klein often had such feelings recently. He knew that this was the vision of a director. By viewing all participants as marionettes or actors, he attempted to control or guide them into putting on a grand performance. Using that hint of familiarity, Klein hurriedly adjusted his state of mind, completely separating his emotions from it and viewing everything in a cold, aloof manner so as to prevent himself from being affected by the play. As a director, he followed the script, referred to reality, and rationally made an analysis to choose according to the circumstances. He allowed emotions to build up, allowing himself to push matters forward and use the clues that had developed. Once his state of mind settled, he felt the potion's power spread across his body, like a sharp, threaded net. Suddenly, Klein felt that his soul body was connected to his physical body. They were split into countless parts, and without being able to hold it in any longer, he let out a cry from deep within his soul.
No!
His thoughts were diced apart, turning into fragments as they fused with different pieces of flesh as he gained his own sentience. These included Klein with pain, Klein with arrogance, Klein with coldness, Klein with gentleness, Klein who could amusement himself, as well as Joe Mangrui, Sherlock Moriarty, Garamond Sparrow, and Dwayne Dantes. His entire spirit body seemed to be thrown into a grinding machine. Not far away, Leonard, whose cheeks were streaming with unconscious tears, first saw Captain Dunn, who was embracing Daily Simone, transform back into Klein Moretti. Following that, he noticed his face, neck, and the back of his hands. Pale colored tendrils protruded out as though they had a life of their own. They kept growing outwards, turning into a transparent maggot, and beneath his clothes there were also signs of squirming. This made Leonard have the feeling that Klein would collapse into a cluster of transparent maggots the next second as they raced in different directions. Just as he wanted to do something, he felt dizzy. He instinctively closed his eyes and didn't dare to keep watching. The transparent maggots that grew out of Klein's body shimmered under the sunlight, producing three-dimensional layers of mysterious symbols. They connected to higher and lower levels, directly presenting the abstract concepts of bizarreness, madness, change, strength, and wisdom. Amidst howling cold winds, black illusory threads rose up around Klein as they bonded together, forming strange tentacles. The tentacles flailed as his soul body, astral projection, body of heart and mind, and ether body were reduced to fragments as they fused with the different maggots that represented Klein's various thoughts, turmoil, and dilemmas. As they wafted between them gently, they seemed to fly up to an infinite height where there were countless illusions hugging huge, distorted buildings. They were either playing wind instruments, giving speeches, growling, or raving. Amidst Klein's countless chaotic senses, everything around him stacked together as though they turned into the spirit world. However, there were living people coming and going with the stars shining upon them. At this moment, the fragments filled with thoughts had similar memories appear. Fresh memories. It was of King of Angels Adam praying with his eyes closed. It was the scene of his shocking appearance. It was him using Death Knell against Ince Zangwill as he pulled the trigger to blast open his head. It was when he revealed his clown smile, saying in a deep voice, "This shot is for Captain." It was when Spectator Adam used an extremely clear and innocent eye to take in the ending of the performance. It was of him turning into Dunn Smith, inviting Daily Simone to dance the closing dance. They were all so fresh on his mind, especially the gaze of a spectator. There was a seemingly corporeal feedback that felt like a magnetic force. It made Klein gradually discover his sense of self-awareness once again.
Who am I?
This was a question that Klein had an answer to when he was still a faceless. He didn't need to think too much about it as he quickly understood his identity, a person from Earth, a person who had been reconstructed from Klein's memory fragments, a person whose experience as a Nighthawk deeply influenced him, a person who played safe and was afraid of danger, but was able to persist and give up everything, a guardian and a miserable wretch. Strange sensory organs that didn't come from the body of heart and mind or soul body were extracted bit by bit from the fragments, condensing Klein's new thoughts: coldness, calmness, spectating, and overlooking. They were thoughts that allowed him to view the world from even more angles and dimensions. He knew that this could possibly be godhood. Without putting up any resistance, he chained the original spirit-body fragments with black threads, allowing him to slowly take form again. At this moment, he realized the purpose of the advancement ritual. It was a mark, an anchor. Compared to other pathways, the Bizarro sorcerer, who experienced the fragmentation of their soul bodies, required an anchor much earlier. However, this didn't require the support of any faith. On the contrary, faith was a numerous and jumbled affair, with too many personal feelings involved. During the fragmentation, during this ritual, it easily wiped away the humanity of the advancer, who was only sequence 5, leaving behind godhood. A grand and profound performance under the watch of countless spectators was enough to make up this anchor. Although the spectators were few in number, as the pinnacle existence of the spectator pathway, Adam could match thousands of ordinary spectators. He could even imagine a theater of spectators to create the effect. With his entire body taking form, all kinds of knowledge surged out from the depths of his demigod spirit body, embroiling Klein's mind and giving him an indescribable impact. It felt as though his brain was about to explode. However, with some level of godhood and his rich experience, he could view this in a detached manner and rather easily pass through this stage. The transparent maggots on his face, hands, neck, and beneath his clothes returned into his body, turning back into the black-haired, brown-eyed Klein Moretti. Looking at Daily Simone, who was still in his embrace and slowly turning cold, he lifted her up and walked to Leonard Mitchell. He bent down and placed her on the ground. Daly no longer had pitch-black scales or white feathers. She had been restored to normal, and her eyes were closed. The corners of her mouth were curled up like she was having the deepest and sweetest dream. Klein stood up and looked at Leonard, who had opened his eyes again, and said heavily,
"She has returned to the goddess's kingdom, just like Captain."
He had turned her into a marionette to reverse Daly's mutation, allowing her to die like a human before releasing his control over her. Leonard tried to force a smile as he whimpered a sound of acknowledgement. Tears were streaming down his face. Klein gently nodded his head.
To her, this might not be the worst outcome. She returned as a human to the embrace of a deity she believes in, and that's where Captain and the others are.
As he spoke, he subconsciously and sincerely raised his right hand and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. Leonard instinctively drew the sign of the crimson moon. He was momentarily taken aback as his expression turned odd. Klein surveyed the area and said,
"Take Ma'am Daly back with you to East Balaam. Make it known that she died due to NC Zangwill's attack and had made exceptional contributions in causing NC Zangwill's death. Don't worry, no one will investigate you. Of course, you can take this opportunity to leave the red gloves."
"I'm used to the church,"
Leonard said heavily. Klein took off his hat and bade farewell with a bow. Holding his hat, he turned to walk to Insei Zangwill's body and took a card that had a chariot and a red priest on it. The red priest wore the face of Roselle Gustav. Leonard's lips quivered as he suddenly asked,
"Aren't you returning to the church?"
Klein didn't turn around as he wore his silk top hat and headed for another exit of the square. After a few steps, he paused and replied to Leonard with his back facing him.
"I can't return anymore."
"Can't return anymore." Leonard stared in a daze as the familiar figure gradually distanced himself and vanished. After a while, a few Beyonders flew to Revival Square. One of them was wearing the clergyman robes of the Church of Evernight. She had a head of beautiful raven-black hair and an exquisite face. No one could tell her age because no one cared. They could only notice the eyes that seemed to contain countless stars within. This lady was floating in mid-air as she looked at the square. All she saw was Ince Zangwill's sorry corpse that could hardly be recognized. Covering his cracked head was a commonly seen tarot card. It was the Star. Above the gray fog, Klein placed the Red Priest card by his left hand and closed his eyes to rest for a moment. He had a basic grasp and understanding of the powers of a bizarro sorcerer. On the one hand, he could transform into animals that weren't too disparate in size. In a spirit body state, he could completely ignore this point. He could transfer wounds from either himself or others onto a paper figurine. He had also gained the enhancement of the flaming jump ability that now spanned nearly 1,000 meters. The might of air bullet reached that of a cannon. On the other hand, he could now obtain initial control of one's spirit body threads in 3 seconds. He could turn a target into his marionette within 15 seconds. His control range was 150 meters. At the same time, he could switch spirit body threads, allowing his marionette to obtain all his Beyonder powers. Within 1,000 meters, he could switch locations with his marionette as he wished. Due to this point, and the maggots he separated as a mythical creature form, as well as the disguise from the spirit body threads, Klein obtained a higher level of body doubles. This also meant that, as long as any one of his marionettes were alive, a bizarro sorcerer would never die. The enemy often found it difficult to know if the one killed was the bizarro sorcerer or his marionette. What was real and what wasn't was difficult to determine. After confirming his state and resting for a moment, Klein immediately walked deep into the mysterious space above the gray fog. He headed for the staircase of light that seemed to lead to heaven. As he expected, there was another step, one formed of light. This time, Klein believed that he could use this 6th step that resembled a giant's to step onto the condensed gray cloud. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He came to the end and, with a leap, stepped onto the cloud formed by the gray fog. Reflecting in his eyes was a door of light tainted with a bluish-black luster. It was formed from countless layers of spherical light, and each spherical light enveloped squirming maggots. Some of them were transparent, others translucent. This was the scene Klein saw through Enzo's eyes, but the objects were very blurry, as though something was obstructing his vision. In addition, above the door of light there were thin black threads that hung down. They were hanging up what seemed like completely transparent cocoons. These cocoons were gently swaying, wrapping different souls. They looked to be of all descents, African, Asian, Caucasians, etc. Some were wearing jeans, others holding cell phones. Some had beautiful clothes, others having beautiful facial features. All of them had the aura as though they were living, but their eyes were tightly closed. Klein's gaze froze as though he had returned to Earth and had walked onto the streets, which were filled with people. Then he noticed that 3 cocoons had opened. They were empty and were swaying with the wind. Raising his head, Klein took in this sight as he observed in silence. Chapter 947, House Call. Backland, East Borough, in a 2-room apartment. A few policemen in black and white checkered uniforms opened the door and entered. All of them reached out to cover their mouths. There was a strong stench of blood inside. The landlord, with a silk top hat, looked around in fear, unwilling to stay in the room for another second.
Officer, I have no idea what happened. Other tenants said that it seems like there's plenty of blood here, that they can even smell it from next door.
A black-haired, blue-eyed police officer with an inspector epaulet waved his hand and said,
"Wait by the door. We still have questions for you."
As he spoke, he wore his white gloves and cast his gaze towards the wooden door of the bedroom. However, he wasn't in a rush to enter. He slowly surveyed the area and visually took in the surroundings. A pile of coal, a cupboard with cutlery and food, a small stove, a cleanly washed iron pot, a somewhat greasy table, 2 collapsed circular stools, 2 slanted chairs, a few glass bottles with unknown powders, and a stack of scattered tarot cards.
A mysticism enthusiast with an ordinary financial situation.
The black-haired, blue-eyed inspector nodded gently as he made a judgment. Then he signaled for a subordinate to open the bedroom door. With a creak, a stronger smell of blood gushed out. The constable who opened the door looked in and let out a short exclamation as he repeatedly retreated. The inspector frowned. He pressed the retreating constable's shoulders, circled around him, and approached the bedroom. When he swept his gaze, his expression immediately changed. In the bedroom, on a wooden bed, there was a man lying there. His hands were tied to the bedpost. He was naked with deep and shallow marks on his body. His blood had long been drained, dyeing the bedsheet and blanket beside him dark red. On a cursory glance, the deceased had apparently been bound by metal wire, cutting into his skin and flesh, right into his bones. This scene still affected the policeman who had seen many murder scenes. Furthermore, it had a diabolical feeling, like it was a ritual. As the inspector was about to say something, two people rushed into the room. One of them attempted to take photos, while the other bombarded him with questions.
Another murder case. Hasn't there been many murder cases in East Borough recently? Officer, do you think it's a serial murder?
The black-haired, blue-eyed inspector frowned and waved his hand.
Do not interfere with the scene, otherwise we will view you as the criminal's accomplice.
He then said to the constable from before,
Kazakhs, please escort the two reporters away. Tell them that if they have any questions, ask the news department of Savella's Yard.
After the reporters were escorted out of the crime scene, the inspector let out a long sigh.
I'm going on the newspapers again. Damn it!
In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall.
Another murder in East Borough. The victim is suspected to have been abused before being killed.
Having had dinner, Audrey was in the activity room casually reading the Backland Evening News. Upon hearing his daughter's soft muttering, Earl Hall shook his head and sighed.
This isn't new in East Borough. The statistics show that there are people dying every day in there. It's far from one person.
Audrey didn't pay too much attention to the matter. After a casual chat with her parents and brother, she returned to her room with her golden retriever, Susie. The human and dog could read each other's minds without any exchanging of words. The latter stood by the door as a guard, while Audrey locked the door. She sat by her bed and chanted Mr. Fool's honorific name. After a few seconds, she saw a dark red beam of light surge and drown everything. Audrey arrived above the gray fog, coming inside the magnificent and ancient palace. She sat by her. She then saw a small room to the side. The mottled door was ajar.
It's much better than the old confessional from before. However, this doesn't match Mr. World's character. Did something happen to his state of mind?
In thought, Audrey entered the room and closed the mottled door. She had previously had a follow-up appointment with the World Gehrman Sparrow and concluded that he had fully recovered. To her surprise, she received a request from him for another treatment. This left her puzzled as she felt a little intrigued. In the rather spacious dark room, Audrey leaned against a wall that obviously had another person behind it. Her body slowly slid down as she knelt down with her legs placed diagonally. In the calm and serene atmosphere, she adjusted her state of mind and said with a brisk tone,
Good evening, Mr. World.
Just as she said that, Audrey's spiritual intuition already knew the situation with his body of heart and mind, or, in common parlance, his emotions or mood.
Gloomy, disheartened, confused, depressed, and having no interest in anything. Mr. World's current problem is completely different from the last one. What happened this time?
Audrey gently bit her lip and calmly made a judgment and used a timely placate. This was the most useful power of a psychiatrist. In ancient times, it was called psychoanalysis. The dark clouds behind the wall scattered significantly. Gehrman Sparrow finally hoarsely said,
Good evening, Miss Justice.
Leaning against the wall, Audrey thought and canceled her original plan. She maintained her brisk tone and said,
I'm very curious about your recent experiences. It seems you have had too many encounters. There's no need to think about anything else. Let's have a chat first, just like we're friends. If you're interested in my life, I'm also willing to share with you some of the interesting matters.
On the opposite side of the wall, Gairman Sparrow fell silent for a moment. Without answering the question, he asked,
What hopes do you have for the future?
Audrey's eyes darted slightly to the side as she replied seriously,
To advance myself, to work hard to become a demigod so as to better protect my father, mother, and brothers. Oh, I've recently visited the applicants to the Bursary Foundation with the other staff of the foundation. Their living conditions are really worse than I imagined. Although I've read some reports and was mentally prepared, I still found it unsettling when I saw it with my own eyes. A girl who's just a few years younger than me was very short and skinny. She doesn't fill her stomach daily, and she only has 2 tattered dresses. When she said that she wishes to study, her eyes were extremely pure and filled with an earnest desire. I can't forget it to this day.
As she spoke, Audrey acutely sensed the change in Gairman Sparrow's mental state. It was no longer a completely still lake, and it was now rippling and undulating. After a short deliberation, this psychiatrist continued, as though she didn't seem to notice anything.
I once anticipated having a beautiful wedding, wishing that my prince will appear like those popular novels. However, after becoming a spectator, I realized that I might never be able to fulfill this dream. I can often read the true thoughts of those men and see through their lies. I'm able to confirm that many people aren't as nice as I imagined, and it has left me disappointed. In a few more years, I might be able to appreciate people for their flaws, but it's really difficult to do so now.
Noticing that Gairman Sparrow, who had his back to her across the wall, having the emotions of laughter, Audrey did a timely placate on him. Then she heard him ask,
You once gathered information about dragons from the sun. You should have some understanding of the dragon of imagination. If I were to tell you that your father, mother, and brothers are imagined by the Spectator Pathway's King of Angels, and that they do not really exist, what would be your reaction?
I'll definitely collapse on the spot and directly lose control. Mr. World has a psychological problem because of his discovery that the thing that he has been anticipating, his ultimate goal, will never be fulfilled.
Audrey was first alarmed by Gairman Sparrow's question before she realized the essence of the question. She didn't reply as she asked in a guiding manner.
You seem to have witnessed the destruction of hope.
Heh.
There was a self-deprecating scoff sounding from the wall behind Audrey.
Indeed, I once thought that I had family. Later I realized that it was only an extravagant hope of mine.
Audrey asked like she was having a casual chat.
Why do you say that?
Gairman Sparrow fell silent for a few seconds before saying,
Have you heard of those fairy tales that Emperor Roselle used for bringing up children?
Audrey acknowledged.
Those are my childhood memories.
At the same time, she discovered that Mr. World's emotions were clearly stirred on the other side of the wall. Repressed pain was surging out. This time, Audrey didn't use placate. Her spiritual intuition and professional knowledge told her that he needed to vent it out. Gairman Sparrow said with a soft, hoarse voice,
Then you should know of Sleeping Beauty and her prince. There's one such person who also entered a deep sleep until he suddenly woke up one day. He believes that his family is still around, and he works hard to improve himself, hoping that he can one day find them. This becomes his main driving force in life. Finally, he realized that he has slept for at least 300 years, or even more than 1,000 years, perhaps even longer. He can never find anything that he once had anymore.
The intense pain and sense of loss was extremely clear to Audrey. She came to a realization.
The gloomy, restrained, experienced, and ruthless Mr. World also has his own goals and reason for existing. This is in line with his gentle heart. How pitiful! Although he was giving an example using a fairy tale, some of the emotions he felt when saying certain words reflect reality. When he mentioned deep sleep, family, 300 years, more than 1,000 years, even longer, never find, his pain clearly increased. This means that he's from an ancient time and has lived to this day due to certain encounters. This matches the situation of Mr. Fool being an awakening ancient god. It's no wonder he became his blessed.
Audrey quickly grasped the key to the matter. She pursed her lips and pondered for a moment.
Did his family say anything? Did they say what they wanted him to do when he wakes up?
Chapter 948, Meaning of Existence. From Audrey's point of view, Mr. World's current situation wasn't him suffering from a mental illness, nor was it close to pushing him to the state of losing control. It was because his goal in life and the meaning to his existence had been destroyed. It left him with a psychological barrier that just needed some guidance. Once she helped him set up a short-term goal, allowing him to find meaning in life, the problem would slowly be resolved. In the serene and silent darkness, Audrey heard Gairman Sparrow answer in a deep voice across the wall.
No.
As expected, Audrey wasn't surprised as she asked,
Then did he search for his family's last words? Did he search for their grave? Did he try to figure out the reason for the deep sleep?
The spirit body behind the wall seemed to vanish for a few seconds as there wasn't a single sound. After a moment, the hoarse voice continued.
No, not yet.
Not yet. That means that it's a possibility in the future. Audrey felt relieved as she clearly felt that Gairman Sparrow's emotional state wasn't as heavy and gloomy as before, without any interest in anything. He had a certain level of drive and a tiny sense of urgency. He was just still in a state of confusion. Taking this opportunity, Audrey cast Placate again. The effects were much better than before. At the very least, she believed that Mr. World had used this impetus to escape from the abyss of gloominess and depression, returning to a normal person's disheartened state. Following that, Audrey didn't press on regarding how he could find clues or investigate, because this could bring about some resistance. She nodded in the dark room in a natural manner and said,
Yes, there are many things to do, and many things that need amending. Perhaps you will have the chance of meeting someone from the same bloodline. Perhaps a family member of his hasn't died from age, or had ended up living to this day due to some reason. The reason why there's meaning to life is because of its infinite possibilities. In the process of searching, make sure to not miss out on your surroundings. Life isn't just a one-way street. There are many branches and alleys. If only the former exists, how boring would it be? You should know how to approach it, to broaden your horizons, and to discover.
Trying hard to recall all the suitable words she read in books, Audrey suddenly thought of something as her voice softened significantly.
Also, don't wear that thick mask. Paragay. The thinner and transparent ones don't matter because everyone wears a mask when interacting with others. No one likes to directly express one's relatively private secrets to others. It's both a way to protect oneself and also a way to respect others. When Mr. World has a certain number of friends, a new meaning in life will naturally be formed.
Audrey added inwardly, but she ultimately didn't say it out loud. She believed that it might even backfire. Unsurprisingly, Gairman Sparrow fell silent again, seemingly still in confusion. After a few seconds, a voice that wasn't that hoarse sounded again.
Thank you for straightening me out, and for your treatment.
No, this is all a result of the strength inside you.
Audrey replied seriously. Mafex, she cast a final placate to confirm that Mr. World's mental state was back to normal and that it wouldn't relapse. Mafex, she then heard Gairman Sparrow say,
Let's end it here for today, okay?
Audrey adjusted her tone and briskly replied,
Of course. It's not a serious problem. I can do another follow-up whenever you're free next week. Also, if it's possible, make some medicine to stabilize your mental state. Take it for 7 consecutive days. The ingredients are 10 grams of chamomile powder, 5 grams of rosemary powder, 10 milliliters of lemon balm extract. During this period, don't reduce your consumption of desserts, and try to relax yourself in an appropriate manner.
In the dark and silent room, she propped herself against the wall with her hands and slowly stood up. At this moment, Gairman Sparrow's voice passed through the wall.
What's the consultation fee?
Audrey held one hand to the wall and turned her head in thought.
Wait till I get the potion formula for sequence 5 of the spectator pathway. I might need you to help me find the ingredients. If the psychology alchemist provides me with the ingredients,
She curled the ends of her lips and said,
When you return from the southern continent to Backland, Remember to bring me some of the local produce as a gift.
A super luxurious and light transportation coffin that's carried by 8 people.
On the other side of the wall, Klein had the inexplicable urge to lampoon. He then stood up while clinging to the wall and sent Miss Justice back to the real world. With a wave of his hand, the room vanished. He returned to the seat of honor at the long bronze table and sat at the seat belonging to the fool. In front of him, there were the Black Emperor, Tyrant, and Red Priest cards of blasphemy on the right. On the left, there was the Creeping Hunger, which Leonard Mitchell had sent back via Miss Messenger Renette Tinneker.
I owe Miss Messenger 10,000 gold coins again.
Klein retracted his gaze and raised his right hand to rub his temples. To prevent Incy Zangwill from escaping through the spirit world, he had already communicated with Renette Tinneker before he made plans for the murder. She was in charge of chasing away all the spirit world creatures around Revival Square in exchange for that very same 10,000 gold coins. The only thing that caught him by surprise was that 008 was more terrifying than he imagined. With Insa Zangwill suffering from Deity's curse, and with King of Angels Adam having drained it, its first attempt was able to attract an unknown creature which could pass through Renette Tinneker's seal. If not for Daily Simone's forceful spirit channeling and signing a pact, Insa Zangwill might very well have escaped. Of course, while under Deity's curse, even if Insa Zangwill were to successfully escape, there was a high chance of him encountering other misfortunes, such as being thrown by the unknown creature to somewhere more dangerous or having it directly cause him harm. However, that wasn't within Klein's control. At the thought that he was 10,000 gold coins in debt again, Klein felt a headache, but his mental state was a lot better. After seeing the cocoon above the gray cloud and the door of light beyond the staircase of light, he had suffered a shock that was as though a river had broken through its banks. He felt that all his expectations had been shattered. His mature worldview, outlook on life, and values had crumbled as a result, causing his entire being to fall into a turbid state as though he were a walking zombie.
Phew!
Klein exhaled and forced himself to turn his thoughts towards the cocoons. And from the scene he saw, his first reaction was,
An extremely high-level existence, or sealed artifact, had used different means to grab a large group of people from Earth at the same moment in time. Here, there were people who used the luck enhancement ritual, others bought strange silver plates, or had their phones hit by some strange virus. Then, these transmigrators had their souls sealed inside the cocoon, and were left hanging above the door of light, awaiting a particular opportunity before being sent to the real world.
Based on Klein's observation, the door of light didn't have any intelligence. It was operating based on pure instinct. This also meant that as long as the conditions were met, it would catalyze a cocoon and deliver the soul inside to a specific target's body. Based on the current circumstances, Klein guessed that there were probably 2 conditions that needed to be met.
First, there mustn't be any other transmigrators prior, or the transmigrator had already been deemed to have failed or died. Second, the calling out of a certain object, item, or ritual. For instance, Klein Moretti had followed the Antigonus family's notebook to perform that dark divination. As for the rest, it's impossible to know, unless I can find the corresponding content in Emperor Roselle's diary. Putting together everything that I know, my current theory should be very close to the truth. This will make it easy to explain why, despite being from the same era as the Emperor on Earth with less than a year in between us, our entry into the real world was separated by slightly more than 200 years. It's because we transmigrated at the same time, but we were released in different eras. Before entering the real world, who knows how long we've been asleep for? A brother from next door.
Klein leaned back into his chair as his eyes shimmered before turning gloomy again. This was a hypothesis he came up with based on the conditions of the Door of Light, his situation, and the Emperor's diary. Of course, this didn't mean that there weren't other possibilities. At present, Klein was just unable to find evidence to support them. For example, a cocoon might represent the life of a transmigrator, but this was in contradiction with Klein's own recovery, or the lack of change in his spirit body. And if his hypothesis wasn't too different from the truth, it meant that he had left Earth, transmigrating over for at least 200 years or even thousands of years. Even if he found the way and method to go back to Earth, he was unable to return to the place he called home. Compared to the gap in distance, the barrier of time left him in greater despair. This was the reason why it caused Klein's mental state to instantly collapse. Returning home was always his ultimate goal.
Miss Justice is right. There are still many questions to resolve and to probe. What's the meaning behind hanging so many transmigrators behind the door of light? What goal does it have? Who set up everything back then? How many people were pulled in here? Where has the other person gone to? The celestial worthy of heaven and earth.
Klein tried hard to engross himself in thinking so as to find a new goal for the future. Unfortunately, he was only able to approach the door of light and not touch it. He was unable to touch it, grasp it, or even carefully inspect it. He had no means to do any studies to receive any direct information.
I should consider finding clues from the real world. Also, since reaching sequence 4 allows me to reach that gray cloud and see the door of light, will there be another qualitative change at sequence 2? Will I be able to gain control over the door of light when that happens, allowing me to figure out the truth? Heh, I was affected by the 7 lights, the goddess, and Herodes' attitude. I almost imagine myself to be the real owner of the gray fog, and believe that I'm some great master above the spirit world. Now from the looks of it, I'm just a test subject that was randomly thrown down. Once I fail, the next transmigrator will appear.
Klein thought as he tapped the edge of the long bronze table. He was rather curious of another point. 3 broken cocoons, with one representing himself and another representing the Emperor, so who was the third one? Chapter 949, Direction of Investigations. Klein's first target of suspicion was undoubtedly Elf King Soniathrum. This ancient god had created chopsticks, made blood cakes, enjoyed eating animal innards, and was good at using spices for cooking. His descendants had facial features, hair color, and eyes that resembled Asians on Earth. Not only did Klein suspect that he was a transmigrator, even Emperor Roselle shared his feelings. Of course, after a deeper level of investigations, Roselle had ruled out that hypothesis from their language, symbols, traditional proverbs, and other facets. Klein believed that using chopsticks as cutlery, the preference for eating innards and using spices, wasn't an exclusive trait. To a species that enjoyed nature, it was possible for these to gradually appear in their daily life. As for why elves who wielded the sailor pathway were close to nature, Klein didn't know why. It was just something as described by the murals and texts they left behind.
I, for one, felt that the Elf King is unlikely to be a transmigrator, but after seeing the 3 shattered cocoons, I can't be too sure. Perhaps he might be a fellow countryman. I can't rule out the possibility that this ancient god isn't a transmigrator, but that one of the high-ranking elves around him is one. This can also allow the tradition to pass down in the name of the Elf King.
Klein tapped his fingers as he thought silently. Almost at the same time, he had 2 directions for his investigation. Grizel's travels had elven songster Ciadas, who served Sanaithrum's queen of Calamity Kohinum.
As long as I enter her sea of collective subconscious, I should be able to see or make contact with the elves and find memory fragments regarding the ancient god. I can also use hypnosis, directly allowing her subconscious to speak. But the problem is that I'm not good at such matters. The last time I attempted to delve into Grizel's subconscious, I felt quick-tempered and could hardly calm down. Although I'm already a demigod, it also becomes more pressing that I resist the inclination towards madness and losing control, and I won't be able to regulate my mental state for quite some time. Forcefully spirit channeling isn't suitable for such a situation and for such a target.
Klein frowned slightly. He felt that he might need a mystical item that was of a relatively high-level sequence in the spectator pathway, or an assistant that was at least a hypnotist. He began seriously considering the possibility of getting Miss Justice's help.
There's no problem doing it. It's not impossible to leave by entering as a spirit body above the gray fog. I don't have to worry that Miss Justice will pry into the secret of a transmigrator. As long as Ciadas doesn't have any knowledge of this, her subconscious and collective subconscious wouldn't point towards such a conclusion. And I can find the desired clues and details so they don't pay any notice. The biggest problem is that Miss Justice has no adventuring experience, and she lacks it. Entering the sea of subconscious of an ancient figure is very dangerous to her. There might be the remnants of an ancient god in there at any time. Once I don't have the help of a psychiatrist, I will also end up the same. Even if I'm getting Miss Justice as support, I'll have to wait until she reaches sequence 5 so that she can use her level to make up for her lack of experience. When that happens, we can first attempt to hypnotize Ciatis and see what we can learn from her mouth. If there's nothing of value, we can consider entering her dream to delve deeper into her consciousness and step into that sea. Yes, the dream charms I create now aren't potent enough. I might not be able to maintain such a long exploration. Sigh, the goddess won't directly respond to such trivial matters. It's a fixed feedback based on a fixed ritual. The corresponding beyonder characteristics have been returned to the church. Don't tell me that I need to bring Leonard with me. I wonder if pulling someone at the spirit-body level can avoid the notice of the grandpa inside him. I'll do some research over the next few days.
Klein reined in his thoughts and considered his second target of suspicion. This person didn't seem too special in the past, nor did Klein believe that he was a transmigrator. But now that his mind calmed down, he began processing his thoughts and analyzing. Klein realized that many points that he viewed as common sense weren't that simple on careful thought. They contained an unspeakable sense of horror. He suspected the ancient sun god, the city of Silver's creator. The 7 churches' separate Bibles have similarities to Earth's Western religions. It is similarly the case for their masses. Based on Little Sun's description, from what Emperor Roselle saw from Adam's chapel, and the content of the murals in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, it's clear that the ancient sun god's main symbol is the cross. He gave his children the names Adam and Ammon. The angels beneath him all have wings of light.
I've not seen that in the other pathways to date.
It's unknown how he rose up. He suddenly appeared late in the second epoch, killed several ancient gods, and took their various authorities.
I never thought much about these details in the past. It's quite scary now that I think deeply of it.
Klein drew a gasp as he began feeling more convinced that it was the ancient sun god instead of Elf King Soniathrim. His experiences were just too legendary, more of a protagonist of an era than Emperor Roselle. Of course, his outcome was rather tragic, becoming a feast for his kings of angels. Emperor Roselle was also tragic, but in no way as terrible.
Doesn't this imply Ammon's and Adam's attitude in a certain sense? They believe that the gray fog is related to their father, but due to their different pathways, they made different choices. There's a certain chance that Adam can't see the gray fog. He isn't a high-sequence beyonder of the fate, marauder, seer, and apprentice pathways.
Klein nodded slightly. Based on these clues, he also had a direction of investigation that didn't require him to make contact with major figures at the angel level. In Groselle's travels lived ascetic snowman, who survived the third epoch and had served the ancient sun god.
The problem circles back to itself. There's nothing to doubt about the rest for the time being.
Klein slowly exhaled, reached out his right hand, and picked up the newly obtained Card of Blasphemy Red Priest card. Infusing his spirituality into it, the card produced a blood-red light, forming a palm-sized illusory book. The pages of the book flipped, presenting portraits of a lifelike Roselle Gustave. He was either wearing a hunter's attire, raising his middle finger, walking through a burning building, or standing behind a trap. He had all sorts of attires and was doing all kinds of things. Sequence 9, Hunter. Sequence 8, Provoker. Sequence 7, Pyromaniac. Sequence 6, Conspirer. Sequence 5, Reaper. Sequence 4, Iron-Blooded Knight. Sequence 3, War Bishop. Sequence 2, Weather Warlock. Sequence 1, Conqueror. Sequence 0, Red Priest. Klein's gaze swept past the different portraits on the tarot card and imprinted the content into his mind. He wasn't surprised at this pathway's Sequence 0's ritual to become a god. This was because Hermes had once told Roselle that the red in Red Priest meant the red of war. Therefore, when he saw stirring up a war that sweeps an entire continent and gain victory, he wasn't stirred at all. After flipping the Red Priest card, he began thinking about problems and felt his mental state improve. He rubbed his temples, finally feeling exhausted.
I should set a short-term goal and investigate the person behind the Great Smog of Backland. This is something that I've yet to complete. Yes, I should continue the arms deal according to my original plans, and return to Backland after receiving the money. Now there are 2 clues. First, the captain of the Royal Guards, Viscount Stratford, and the other is MI9's Deputy Director, Brigadier General Quintus Kilgore.
Klein tried to pull himself up and decided to occupy himself with something. Before leaving the gray fog, he threw the mental medicine recipe that Miss Justice had given him to the crimson star representing the moon Emlyn. He requested this vampire, who was good at making it, to make a week's worth at £1 a bottle. Backland, within the Eudora family's villa. Emlyn White, who was waiting in the activity room, curled his lips and thought to himself,
"A transaction that's just £7. I really don't want to do it. The world can concoct it himself if he's a little careful."
He hadn't objected to the world's request, because after spending £5,000 to buy the Sequence 5 Vampire Beyonder characteristic, he only had £730 left. At this moment, Cosme walked over, looking like a middle-aged gentleman. After exchanging a bow, the Sanguine Baron asked,
"Emlyn, why are you suddenly here?"
Emlyn immediately felt a little guilty before recalling his previous experiences of conversing with the Hanged Man and the world. He tipped his chin slightly and answered in a seemingly casual manner.
"I've received a Sequence 5 Scarlet Scholar Beyonder characteristic. I wonder when we can begin the ritual to make me a Viscount."
Cosme was taken aback as he asked in surprise,
"You obtained a Scarlet Scholar Beyonder characteristic?"
Emlyn glanced at him and nodded with a faint smile.
"That's right."
He didn't explain how he had obtained the Beyonder characteristic, as though Cosme wasn't worthy of knowing. Cosme turned agape as he fell silent. After a few seconds, he said,
"Wait till the next full moon."
He paused and said,
"I happen to have something for you. My grandfather wishes to inform you that an important figure will be coming to Backland. He wishes to meet you." "He?"
Emlyn's pupils dilated instantly. The ancient ones of the Sanguine that lived since the Second Epoch to this day, together with the Grade 0 sealed artifacts, all of those important existences at the angel level didn't exceed 5 in number. Chapter 950, Keeping Secrets. Emlyn fell silent for 2 seconds as he lowered his chin and asked,
"Who is it?"
To him, angels were naturally worthy of respect, but those who could truly make him bow his head were the important figures addressed as he by every Sanguine. They had witnessed and experienced the Sanguine's long history, the source of his pride.
"I'm not sure. But in short, I'll notify you when the time comes."
Cosmiodora shook his head.
The person is coming because of the ancestor's revelation. There are subsequent instructions. Why doesn't the ancestor directly give me a revelation? This will be better concealed. I'm her chosen one. This is to avoid agitating Mr. Fool.
Questions flashed past Emlyn's mind as he answered them himself. He didn't speak further as he wore his top hat and left Odora's villa. When he arrived at the door, he looked at the thin clouds that could hardly block out the sun. Emlyn curled his lips in disdain, raised his hand to press down on his hat, and ran for a rental carriage at the end of the street as he inwardly mumbled,
Such weather really isn't suitable for heading out. The medicine that the world wants isn't rare. It can be concocted in 15 minutes. The ingredients I ordered previously should be in by today. I can carry out the transaction with Miss Magician that I've delayed for days.
Backland, Cherwood Borough. Fours placed glass bottles on an altar and looked at the light blue and golden liquids, feeling the exhilaration from shopping.
More enticing than a cocktail. I wonder what it tastes like. Putting some ice in might make it taste better. Seriously, what am I thinking? These are all medicine.
Fours sputtered at herself and hurriedly cleaned up the room. Upon receiving the medicine required for medical treatment, she finished her preparations for heading to the abandoned castle in Delaire Forest. She was just waiting for Shio to return. After tidying up certain matters, Fours slumped onto the sofa and casually picked up a few newspaper copies and began planning her itinerary for the day.
Set off at dusk. Dinner will probably be when we arrive at the town bordering the forest.
Amidst her silent mumbling, Fours flipped to the copy of News at Sea. Suddenly, her gaze froze as a familiar name was reflected in her eyes. Gehrman Sparrow! This adventurer had appeared at sea again, boarding the Black Tulip with a middle-aged name known as Death Consul. He killed Admiral Hell Ludwell, changing the lineup of the 7 pirate admirals again. Fours subconsciously patted her chest, unsure what she was happy about. At that instant, she had a baffling feeling that Gehrman Sparrow's experiences were sufficiently legendary, something that could definitely be written into a novel.
Unfortunately, he's not someone who's easy to get along with. Otherwise, I can totally be a part-time biographer to write a book for him. Haha. If I were to write the book titled Gehrman Sparrow, I'll definitely be targeted by the official Beyonders.
Fours thought in amusement before hearing the lock turn. She looked up and saw CO pushing open the door and entering the living room.
You're early?
Fours asked in surprise. Ki Porkowur Jai when CO ruffled the right side of her blonde hair and said,
I met with MI9 again and received a mission.
What is it?
Fours sat up, asking out of curiosity. Shio casually threw herself onto the single-seater.
Investigate the background of the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow. Based on the information provided by MI9, he's a terrifying beyonder, and the name he uses is fake. Even his identification documents are fake. He probably came from Backland. They suspect that Gehrman Sparrow has another identity and partners here.
Upon hearing the word partners, Fours couldn't help but twitch the corners of her mouth. She had the urge to tell Shio that MI9's guess was right. Gehrman Sparrow's partner was sitting directly opposite her. She coughed slightly and acted calm while she asked,
Why are you investigating Gehrman Sparrow's background? What did he do this time?
Shio glanced at the stack of newspapers beside Fours.
Haven't you read today's News at Sea? Gehrman Sparrow killed Admiral Hell Ludwell and is now known as the strongest adventurer of the 5 seas. By the way, MI9 also told me that Gehrman Sparrow might very well believe in the secret existence known as the Fool. This is news that came from many different sources, including the Aurora Order and the Rose School of Thought.
I can testify to that. They are right.
Fours forced a smile and said,
Sounds rather dangerous.
Yeah.
CO nodded.
I only plan on gathering the intel and not delving too deep into it.
Fours didn't continue on this topic, as she said,
I've already prepared the medicine. Shall we head to Delaire Forest today?
Gio had already become a Sequence 7 interrogator a few days ago, and she had mastered a rather useful power, psychic piercing.
All right.
CO stood up, showcasing how she was a woman of action.
Let's set off now.
Let's wait a little longer. I was thinking dusk.
Fours replied, feeling a little resistant. She often wished to procrastinate until the last moment. Before long, she was pulled out of their rented apartment by Zio while bringing all kinds of items along. They got a rental carriage and headed for the metro. Amidst the sonorous whistle of the steam engine, the massive steam locomotive hauled its meandering body and entered the platform. Under the illumination of the wall lamps on both sides, it stopped. Force and Gio stood outside a carriage and waited patiently for the passengers to alight. Suddenly, they saw 2 red gloves. The owner of the red gloves was a man in his 30s. He wore a white shirt with a black trench coat. His collar was raised up high, covering his chin and mouth. He had a pair of dark green eyes with golden brown sideburns. He held a silver chest that was big enough to put a tiny violin in it. Fours and Shio exchanged looks as they lowered their gaze, staring at their toes. As a high-ranking deacon of the Church of Evernights Nighthawks, one of the 22 members of power in the church, and one of the 3 bigwigs of the Red Gloves, Crested Sesamir wasn't someone who cared about parading himself around. He enjoyed traveling alone, taking the transportation that commoners took, making him appear like an ordinary clergyman. After transferring to another line, he eventually arrived in Northborough. He then took a rental carriage and headed straight for St. Samuel Cathedral, where he met Backlund Diocese Archbishop St. Anthony Stevenson. After greeting each other and praising the goddess, Sesamir found a seat and said,
"I'll be troubling you to provide me with some help for the next couple weeks."
The clean-shaved Archbishop Anthony, in his black robe with red accents, sat down as well. He deliberated before asking,
Is it something to do with Inse Zangwill?
Yes.
Sesamir nodded slightly.
The Holy See wishes that I inform you that another servant of the goddess, the matron of the Evernight Cloister, Mam Ariana, will be in Backlund not long from now.
This ascetic was ranked first among all the 13 archbishops. Without waiting for St. Anthony's inquiry, he explained in detail.
Mam Ilya learned plenty of important information from Inse Zangwill's remnant spirit, including his mental problems that 0-08 used to escape, as well as the details of his cooperation with the royal family and the demoness sect. After machinating the Great Smog of Backlund, Inse Zangwill was betrayed by 0-08 and had ended up being possessed by the Red Angel evil spirit. He headed for the southern continent alone, in an attempt to set up a trap to hunt Mam Ilya. An important point to take note of is that in Inse Zangwill's memories, there is a very important underground ruin. It's in the northwestern outskirts of Backlund, an area just before the Tussock River flows in. My mission is to find that ruin.
St. Anthony finished listening in silence before asking in thought,
Inse Zangwill doesn't know of the exact location? He has never been there before?
Sesamir shook his head.
He had entered, but he was let in there and didn't grasp the required key information.
St. Anthony tersely acknowledged before asking,
Have you figured out which batch of people from the royal family that Inse Zangwill was working with?
No.
Crested Sesamir paused and continued.
Based on normal logic, regardless of whether the partners don disguises, if they meet, there should be the corresponding memory fragments, but inside Inse Zangwill's spirit body, there were no traces of that. It was as though it never existed.
Perhaps it's an influence of a deed. The source of the deed's power, that even a Sequence 4 demigod can't resist, is something worth paying attention to.
St. Anthony nodded very slightly. He thought and said,
The telegram didn't include much. I do not know the exact sequence of events. Who exactly killed Inse Zangwill?
Crested Sesamir exhaled slowly and said,
A name you might never believe, Klein Moretti.
The Nighthawk who died in the line of duty during the Tingen incident?
Anthony's wrinkles deepened.
Yes, that's what Ilya sent back. No one knows how Klein Moretti, who was only a Sequence 8, had resurrected, or how he could kill Inse Zangwill, a demigod wielding 0-08.
Upon saying this, Sesamir's expression turned somewhat odd.
The Holy See requests us to strictly keep this intel confidential. We are not to divulge this to anyone who isn't an archbishop or high-ranking deacon. Furthermore, we are not to pursue Klein Moretti, pretending as though he's still in his grave.
St. Anthony fell silent for a few seconds, as though he recalled something trivial. He nodded and said,
Perhaps he's a blessed of the goddess.
Sesamir suddenly looked up at St. Anthony as though he was a lunatic. His lips quivered, but he ultimately didn't say a word. Anthony didn't continue the topic as he looked at the door and said sternly,
Your mission might need plenty of investigations. This requires enough manpower. Soest's team has completed their mission in the southern continent. I'll get them to return quickly and follow your instructions.
All right.
Crested Sesamir didn't put up any objections.
Rest for the remainder of the day before returning to Backlund?
Leonard looked up at Team Captain Soest. Soest looked pitifully at Leonard, who had been silent for quite some time, and nodded.
That's right.
After watching this spirit warlock leave his room, Leonard sighed and leaned against the wall. At this moment, dark red light surged out from before his eyes, enveloping him completely without any prior warning.